Good evening and welcome to Overtime here on WOTM. Happy Wednesday night. We're here for the next 1 hour talking everything in the world of sports. We'll have our buddy Mark Everett Kelly back in the house. We'll have him coming up in our second segment all the way through the end of the show. We start this first segment where we started last night, the continuation of the high school basketball playoffs in the regional round. The regional finals continue to chug along. We have games coming up again on Thursday and on Friday. We'll start with today's action. Wednesday, crowning some champions in different regional spots. We'll start with the Northeast Regional at Jacksonville State University, where they had 7A and 1A crowning the regional champions. The 7A girls at 9 o'clock this morning, a great game between Hewitt-Trussville and Vestavia. Hewitt-Trussville down double digits in the second half before making a rally. It was Amaya Payne that launched the last-second jump shot to rally the Lady Huskies into the state tournament. They win. Final score 48-46 over the Rebels. So Hewitt-Trussville is in on the girls' side. On the boys' side, another great one. A one-point game won by Spain Park. Late in that game, they had to hold off a furious rally by Huntsville, but it's the Spain Park Jaguars into the Final Four. The Skyline girls knocked off Decatur. That score, it's not a misprint. 62-18. The number one team in the state looking the part once again. They're headed back to Birmingham for the Final Four. Meanwhile, the Decatur Heritage boys knocked out JCA. You might remember JCA made it to the Final Four last year. Their season ends one round short in the Elite Eight. Decatur Heritage moves on as the winner of the 1A Northeast Regional Championship. Meanwhile, over at the Northwest Regional at Wallace-Hanceville, the 6A girls won a very, very close one by Hazel Green, 32-25. Whenever you see these low-scoring games, it makes you realize how non-traditional these games are. That 9 o'clock start time probably had a lot to do with the fact that it's so low scoring. But it's Hazel Green, the three-time defending state champions, one of the perennial powers in Class 6A, moving back to Birmingham for the state semifinals and the Final Four in Birmingham next week over Hartselle. Scottsboro with a win over Clay Chalkville. That means the Scottsboro boys are headed to Birmingham, back to the Final Four. Susan Moore and Lauderdale County. Lauderdale County has won several state championships. Their season ends. Susan Moore moves on with the win in that game at Wallace-Hanceville. And finally, Danville Danville and Winfield. Winfield pulled away in the second half. Danville scored just 1 point in the third quarter. Winfield wins it 60-28. They move on to the Final Four over in Birmingham. Meanwhile, there was also a lot of great action down south over in Garrett Coliseum in Montgomery. They're hosting both the Southeast and Southwest regionals over there. We had a great game in the 7A boys regional final. It was Auburn and Fairhope. Our friend Ben Thomas of AL.com captured the game. Last seconds in the game, double overtime between the Tigers and Fairhope. That's how the Tigers got it done. So Nora Warren played the hero, lifting Auburn past Fairhope. Fairhope was the number 2 team in the state. They had only lost one game going into that one. Double overtime. It's the Tigers in Birmingham with a 54-52 win over Fairhope. The game before that, the Auburn girls are also in Birmingham with the Final Four. They won over Central Phoenix City, their rivals, really, really close down there. Played over at Garrett Coliseum in the state capital, 52-39. So congratulations to the Auburn boys and girls, a lot like the Anniston boys and girls, both making the trip to Birmingham next week. The Sampson girls over Georgiana, 54-36. Sampson moves on to the next round, and Notasulga with a win over Winterboro, 69-51. So Notasulga is in as well. The regional finals also continue in the Southwest Regional at Garrett Coliseum. You see the matchups: Hillcrest Evergreen and T.R. Miller in the 3A girls. Meanwhile, the 3A boys, the number 1 team in the state, Cottage Hill, against Southside Selma. Coming up tomorrow, we'll have championships as well. Starting in the Northwest Regional at Wallace-Hanceville, they'll crown 7A champions and 1A champions. The Hoover boys and Hoover girls are both in the mix, as well as Meek and Marion County girls, and Pickens County and the Bell Green boys. Meanwhile, at the Southwest Regional, another 4-game slate over there starting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Both Carver Montgomery boys and girls will play the Eufaula boys and girls. All Carver Eufaula affair in Class 6A and 7A over there. Meanwhile, Linden and A.L. Johnson in Class 1A, Otagoville and Keith in Class 1A as well. Meanwhile, at the other two finals, the Northeast and the Southeast, just 2 games apiece, settling out the Class 2A championship. So we'll have all of our Final Four participants just about rounding off coming up tomorrow. All the other championships will end on Friday, and then the state tournament gets underway next week in Birmingham at the Crossplex and at UAB's Bartow Arena. Well, coming up next here on Overtime, we shift gears from high school over to college. We'll talk Bama hoops with Mark coming up next. Welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. I'm Gerhard Mathangani, joined by Mark Everett Kelly, our sports historian, our researcher. He does a great job diving into the numbers and letting the numbers tell the story about what you're seeing on the court and on the field. Does a great job with it. We're glad to have him back here on set once again. Mark, let's start with the Alabama basketball team. Obviously, they have a big game tonight against Arkansas. Alabama also in a position now where they can get themselves into an SEC championship. Before they can get themselves into the SEC tournament championship, they can win the SEC's regular season championship against tonight. Some high stakes over in Fayetteville.
Yeah, I mean, there are only 4 coaches that ever won the SEC regular season title at Alabama. You have Nate Oats, you have C.M. Newton, who's won 3. Johnny Dee, a guy back in the 70s, and then Wimp Sanderson as well. Before that, Mark Gottfried won one in 2002. That was the last time they went. So he would be the 5th, Nate Oats. And it's just amazing that they've advanced this far this quickly.
Right.
Because when the last coach, the guy from Avery Johnson, when he left, everybody thought that they might struggle a little bit. Nobody really knew it. Nate Oats, he came over from Buffalo, which was a really good program. You have good coaches that come over from there. But they've really advanced this year, and they've done things incredibly well. They're playing the best at so many different levels in the SEC, leading so many different categories. Now, Arkansas, probably the 2nd best team this year. You've had a really weird year in the SEC.
Right.
Most of the teams, Kentucky, which is a powerhouse every year, they haven't really played well. Louisiana State has played well at times. Tennessee, that was preseason favorite, has been totally up and down and really, messed up the bed a couple times this season in big games. So Arkansas, they've won 7 straight in the SEC. They, like Alabama, lost in the ACC Big 12 Challenge or SEC Big 12 Challenge. A guy that really is a key behind their success, like Herbert Jones is with Alabama, is Justin Smith.
Right.
He's a senior. He was hurt. He got hurt first couple games in the SEC play, came back against Alabama, didn't really play well. So those numbers don't include that game. But
the January 16th game, the first time they played.
Right, the first time they played, and Alabama won by 31. That's since then 8-1 with him in SEC play, 1-4 without. And you see they're better much better defensively, averaging less than 11 points per game with him. They shoot the ball better. He's senior leadership really matters. You can tell with Alabama, they have it on their team. With Petty, and just so many different aspects. When you get to this point of the season, you need those seniors to really step up. He really helps out Moses Moody, who's been one of the best players in the country in the SEC.
Exactly. And you talked about Justin Smith as one of the guys that Nate Oats had talked about in his press conference, and he mentioned the fact that they're a completely different ball team with him on the court. And basketball, in my opinion, has really changed in this way because senior leadership has meant so much. Because a lot of your freshmen, super talented, ready to go to the next level, ready to go to the NBA. However, they don't have that maturity because there is a huge difference between a 17, 18-year-old and a 22-year-old. And you have guys like John Petty at Alabama, and you also have a guy like Herb Jones that you mentioned with the Crimson Tide, leading to their success. We're going to talk about the teams that are at the top of the polls and some of the favorites to win it all, like Gonzaga and like Baylor, who have a chock full of teams of guys that are of seniors and guys that have been there before, been in the trenches. Justin Smith is another one. However, you also point to another guy that they have who's a freshman on this basketball team who also makes a big impact on their basketball team with Moses Moody. Yeah, Moses Moody, one of only 2 guys in the SEC to be averaging 15 points per game and 5 rebounds per game. One of only 3 freshmen in the country to be doing that. And you could see the difference when he's in the game. And now more than ever, you have these freshmen in the SEC really contributing and helping their teams reach another level. And in a year like this where you have so many unknown things going on, so many different
factors that go into winning and losing that are different this time.
Right.
With COVID, it's messed so many things up. You don't have the same press conferences. Players have different expectations. You don't know which guys are going to opt out. So there's always so many different questions. To have freshmen come in, you've seen it at Auburn, you've seen it at LSU, and play well. That's a big part of if a team's going to be successful or not. And Arkansas, during the second half of the SEC season, has really done that well. I saw when they beat Missouri, that was a game that came down to the last couple of possessions, and Arkansas, and especially having Justin Smith there, the senior leadership of Justin Smith and the ability for Moses Moody to kind of be that exceptional freshman. You always, even if you have senior leadership, you still need that player to go to that's better than everybody on the team. And Moody's been able to do that in so many different ways for Arkansas. And like tonight's the first time since the late 90s that you have two ranked teams playing up by Walton Arena. So it's been a while since Arkansas has had this type of excitement in their program.
It's kind of hard to believe when you put that up there that you would figure one of the other ranked SEC teams would have gone in there and played, whether it's an LSU or maybe an Alabama or an Auburn. But as you mentioned, the first time in a very, very long time, that is the case. Let's talk big picture now with Alabama. What are some of the things that you want to see them improve, or some of the ways that you feel they need to improve as they move forward and as they try to get themselves ready, not only for a conference championship, but also an NCAA March Madness run?
Well, they do a lot of things really well. They do a lot of things that you need to win in the NCAA tournament. They have great guard play. You need great guard play. They get after you defensively. You need to be consistent defensively, because if you're not consistent defensively, that's the one thing you could always control. I always used to tell my guys when I coach high school, you're going to have games where you're going to miss shots. You're going to have games where you're going to turn the ball over, but every game you can come out and put it to them defensively, and they do that. That is really the symbol that they are proud of under Nate Oats, and that's what he stands for too. If you don't play defense, they don't care what you do, he's not going to have you in the lineup. The other thing they do, they space each other very well on offense. So if you noticed, they have four guys on the perimeter, and Jones kind of floats on the baseline, which allows him to get a lot of those offensive rebounds, which allows them to move the ball, penetrate really quickly, kick it back out. Guys are open for three, and then they pressure you really well in full court and in the half court. They rotate very well on defense. All those things you need to consistently do in the NCAA tournament, because these are teams you don't really see much.
Right.
You know, you might get a team from the MEAC or, you know, the Atlantic 10 that you didn't see, and all of a sudden they have guys that can do things athletically that you're not used to in the SEC, which is a totally different brand of basketball.
Exactly.
But the ability to play consistent defense, to get in people's faces, to make them uncomfortable, Alabama does that better than, I think, anybody in the country. And you can see they're going to win their first, you know, if they win tonight, their first division title since 2002. This is big news for them. It's been a long time since Alabama has really won and been the best team in the SEC. That's the overall #1 best record, 2002. They won a division back in 2011.
Right.
But it's not like winning the overall SEC.
Exactly, and they'll set themselves up in a great position as they move forward. And a lot of things you just mentioned about being able to spread, being able to spread the court open and have consistent shooters. That is exactly what Auburn had when they made their run to the Final Four, knocking out the likes of North Carolina, blue bloods like Kansas, and Kentucky on that way to that Final Four as well.
But that's the other thing, though. This year, the major horses aren't there.
That's another thing, yeah.
You know, Duke, North Carolina, Kentucky. But Duke might make it, but North Carolina, Kentucky, a lot of the major teams that you always see every year in the NCAA tournament, you're not going to have to play them this year. So you got a bunch of other teams like the Baylors and the Gonzagas. Gonzagas, for all their success, they've never won a national championship.
That's correct. That's correct. And I mean, it's funny that Butler has been closer to winning a national championship than Gonzaga has, considering Gonzaga's crazy success over the last few years. Coming up is Mississippi State on Saturday after tonight's game at Arkansas, of course, and then Auburn in the rematch coming up on Tuesday. Javon Quinterly talked about the possibility of sewing up that SEC championship tonight in Fayetteville.
You know, that would be great. That's one of the goals, like Reese said, that's one of the goals that we set in the beginning of the year. So just being able to go out there and win that, you know, 3 games before the conference season is over is just, you know, that just goes to show you how locked in this group has been. And, that'll be a big accomplishment. And that's just something that we're striving for. And, you know, we're just trying to, you know, that would be great. That's one of the goals, like Reese said, that's one of the goals.
We're talking more basketball here on Overtime. Coming up next, we'll talk about some of the top seeds, where Alabama might fall in the big dance coming up in just a little bit. Join us for that next. We're back here in overtime on WOTM. We talked in the micro about Alabama's basketball team. Let's go to the macro now. NCAA tournament is just around the corner. Conference championships are being played over the course of the next couple of weeks. Interesting time in college basketball and an interesting year overall because this tournament, as everybody knows, the world of sports is completely flipped on its head because of the coronavirus pandemic. Unlike any other year where you might travel to one or two places for your first round games and then another set for your second round games, NCAA is handling this like a bubble, like we saw in the NBA at the end of last year. It'll be a little bit different, but the top teams that have been playing well have been doing so all year long. And I think a lot of them have the same characteristics we talked about Alabama in our last segment. As you take a look at basketball overall, the top 10, and then we'll get into some of the seeds early on. What are some of the things that you're looking for these top teams in order to make a run here late?
Well, I mean, you got to also understand, where you are in the season. Conference tournament play, to me, this is my favorite time of the year. When I worked at ESPN, this was absolute insanity this week.
Yeah.
Starting with the smaller conferences and then going through the big conferences. Every week, you work 80, 90 hours a week. I was there from 6 in the morning to 2 in the morning,
right.
Helping out the anchors with information. This is the best time of the year if you're a college basketball fan. And the smaller conferences have a lot of great things that they bring where you could watch and see the possibility of a team maybe making a run in the NCAA tournament by winning their conference tournament.
Right.
But also for some of these teams that struggled during the season, this is their time. I remember Connecticut back in 2012 had a run where they were out of it, and they won 6 straight Big East tournament games, wound up winning the national championship.
Right, exactly.
So you could do that. NC State with Jim Valvano, they didn't, in 1983, they had no chance of making the tournament if they did not win their conference tournament, and they did. So for the bigger schools, if you've had a team like Gonzaga or Baylor, if you're undefeated especially, and you're trying to protect that, the conference tournament is a time for you to make sure you don't get anybody hurt, first of all, because I remember Cincinnati when they lost Kenyon Martin back in 2000.
Right, yeah.
Whoop, that was it for them.
Right.
So that would be the biggest disaster. So it's basically to stay healthy, make sure you do the same things you've done all season, and kind of prepare you guys mentally for what's coming up.
Right, and it's a gauntlet. It's a crazy stretch, especially for the top 2 teams that still sit, as you said, with 0 losses on the year. A guy you know really well, Andy Katz. He's done a little thing with the NCAA. He released his bracket. Of course, the selection committee will have the official bracket coming up in a few weeks, but it kind of gave some insight from a guy who studied college basketball for a very, very long time about what he thinks as far as the top 4 seeds go. These are your top 4 seeds, essentially your top 16 teams in the country. Number one, do you agree with his top 4? The 4 seeds overall, but then also, do you see any disparities, and do you see any of the teams that are not on that one line being able to come out and maybe make some noise and not only go to a Final Four, but win a national championship?
Well, I mean, Michigan had that part in the season where they had to take off for a couple weeks,
That's
and
right.
they've still been able to play well. Michigan has a history of playing well in the NCAA tournament, going way back to Glenn Rice, who was a record for most points for a player in one NCAA tournament back in 1989. And before that, they had a history of not doing well. So, but then you have the Fab Five. So Michigan is a team that, if they get their act together, you've seen them already. Once you go through that with COVID, it kind of toughens you a little bit, I think. And you're used to that time off, and maybe you have people doubting you, say, we can forget about them now. So they probably have a little something more to play for. Out of those teams, look, Villanova is a team I saw play last night because St. John's going back is is the team I rooted for growing up. And the guy who used to coach over at Arkansas is now our coach. So I say their coach. And they got blown. Villanova blew out St. John's last night, and they are. Jay Wright is a guy that I knew when he was at Hofstra. He's a Long Island guy, like I am, a great coach, a guy that always has his teams prepared. They're going to be dangerous in that number 2 seed. All 4 1 seeds, very rarely, if ever, I think maybe one time, all 4 number 1 seeds made it to the Final Four.
Right.
So you're going to have some upsets.
Exactly, and I think you've already seen some interesting things as the season has gone along. You saw Oklahoma knock off Alabama. Of course, that was a home game for Oklahoma. We've seen Florida State play some pretty good games here recently. Kansas, who looked terrible about a month ago.
I know.
They've now kind of picked their
They're
act
hot.
up, and they find themselves where they find themselves on the top 4 seeds line. And also Houston, who played well early in the year, they've dipped off a little bit as well.
But also these guys, some of these teams have not been in the spotlight. Some of these guys don't know what the pressure's like to play in an NCAA tournament game. And when you have all the things on you, and it's now your time to shine, when it was like it was for Duke and North Carolina, that's a whole different style of pressure that now you got to come out and answer the bell. Florida State's historically a very bad team in the NCAA tournament.
Right.
So, and even Alabama, the furthest they got was the Elite Eight in 2004 when they lost to Emeka Okafor and Connecticut. That was the Kennedy Winston team and Antoine Petway. They got to the Elite Eight. So I expect Alabama, when they get in, to do really well, to really make a dent in the tournament because of the type of basketball they play.
Exactly. Well, take a look at some of the highlights from the top teams in and around the country. Gonzaga is one of those teams that, to me, they always have had skilled bigs.
Yeah.
And you mix that with the style of basketball that's being played in 2021. All you have to do is just look at any NBA game, and you could tell it's a shooter's game. If you can shoot, you'll stay on the court. You mentioned defense earlier. You have to play some level of defense, but
Right.
I think on the college level, there are different ways to win. I think that's the reason why a lot of people like the tournament, because you'll have teams that they have to win in a very, very segmented way.
Yeah.
But if you find
It's
a
funny,
matchup,
it's unique, yeah.
to find a matchup that you like, that's where you see these upsets. And
Yeah,
I think
sure.
we're in for a really good tournament this year, especially because of the fact that, so many teams have had to go through so many different things. Michigan had to go through a COVID thing. SEC's had outbreaks here lately. I think, unlike any other year where everything is different, this year is different on top of the different that you normally always see in every tournament anyways.
I mean, every year you're worried. If you're a top seed, you're worried about, the 5-12 is always an upset.
That's right.
Okay.
Right.
I remember when Florida made it to the final in 2000 with Mike Miller. They almost lost in the first round to
Right.
Butler then, who was not Butler yet. Miller hit a game-winning shot at
Right.
the buzzer, and that was before really Billy Donovan was known as a tournament coach. They were historically bad. They had Teddy Dubé. They had Udonis Haslem on that team. They make a shot at the buzzer in a 5-12 matchup. Next thing you know, they beat a great Duke team in the Sweet 16 and go to the final.
Right.
You had Mike Davis one year in Indiana get to the final against Maryland in 2002. Totally come out of nowhere. The last time St. John's was really good, they ran up against Gonzaga.
Right.
And just an awful matchup for them. They could have beaten so many other teams and matched up well with so many other teams, but Gonzaga was one of those teams they did not match up well with. But why I think Gonzaga, even though they can shoot the ball well, they have bigs that can play really well in the post and can also take you out in the perimeter, but they don't really consistently defend like you need to get that big stop at times during a game. They've never really had a defensive stopper or really been known for a team that can really get after you defensively. They do a lot of things incredibly well, but defensively, I think that's really where they've fallen short all these times because they've had some really great teams.
Exactly. Conference championships start next week, and then we'll have the selection show and then March Madness. Get ready to fill out your bracket. We talked about the COVID-19 pandemic. That's kind of what started the domino effect. And last year we didn't get a chance to see the SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament. Hopefully this year we'll be able to do so in Indianapolis. Well, coming up next here on Overtime, we'll talk college baseball. Welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. So, Mark, let's talk a little bit of baseball at this point. We're in the part of the season that everybody's got their first games, their first weekend games now out of the way, and now their first midweek games out of the way. Jacksonville State played Alabama in a great game over at Jim K Stadium yesterday. It's obviously like one of these matchups that you love seeing because it's two in-state teams playing against one another, but at the same time, you get a chance where Jacksonville State, a smaller school in a smaller conference, welcoming a top 25 team in the country. What are some of your takeaways? I know it's very early. We're not projecting national champions or anything, but what are some of your early thoughts on some of the teams that play in the state and what you've seen of college baseball so far this year?
Well, it's going to be fun for me to be able to go out and see some of these teams play. Because being new to the area, I really don't know that much about Jack State. I've heard a lot about the program they run. And Alabama is one of the teams that usually in the SEC, it's just a great conference. So you're used to seeing great play come out of that conference. But look, I mean, just the grass, the dirt, being able to be out there on like a 60, 70-degree day,
right.
That was what I really loved as a player. And the individual matchup you have as a batter, trying to figure out the pitcher, and then when you get on base, trying to figure out what the pitcher does and when to run on him, looking at the catcher, trying to steal signs, all the great things that baseball represents. I think that's what you have at this level.
Right.
Because you really shrink down baseball now to where it becomes a mental game. It becomes a pitcher batter. You know, you have to pay attention to what the pitcher threw you. And the batters, you know, they talk in the dugout and they watch out for this, watch out for that. That's what I really miss about playing baseball, because I love playing baseball. The team game, the way that the athletes are with each other, it's a bonding experience that I think a lot of these guys miss when COVID happened. So it's really nice to see college baseball back, get into warmer weather and kind of get a little bit back to normal. I think that's what I'm really looking forward to as a fan, and then getting to see some of the things that everybody's talked about with these two teams, especially Alabama this year, who is coming off, like you said, really been good in February, and now we'll see what they can do going on to March.
Exactly, and they won that game at Jacksonville State 5-2 yesterday, and they'll head back on the road. They'll host another game, and then they'll head back on the road for their weekend series. Meanwhile, the Crimson Tide, by the way, has now won 18 games in the month of February, going back to last year. They also own a 31-2 mark in the month with their head coach, Brad Bohannon, of course, took the job last year. Talk about teams around the state. Alabama and Auburn both 4-0. Troy also with a nice start at 4-1. Sanford is 3-1 on the year. UAB is 2-2. JSU is struggling. Of course, they had to put together a very last-minute schedule last week, even to get on the field, because their games against Baylor were canceled because of all the ice that we had in the state of Texas. So they scrambled, put some games together. We expect to see Jim Case's group doing pretty well before the year is over. But that's where we stand right now after 4 games in the search so far in the college baseball season. Well, coming up next, we're also talking SCS football. They got off to a start last week. However, Jacksonville State will get off to the start this week. We'll talk football in all measures, both college and pro, next year on Overtime. Welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. Mark, let's shift gears over to football. It's so weird having a spring football season. We had some games last week, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday on the FCS level. A lot of teams were able to get on the field. After a weird fall season where the FCS teams could play some non-conference games in some situations, Jacksonville State took advantage of that, played 4 non-conference games in the fall. They'll carry that 3-1 record into the spring, and so they'll have a 3-1 record as they go into their first game in the spring. What are some of your takeaways after 1 week of football? I know a lot of the games weren't necessarily huge, great games. We did see some top 5 matchups. We did see some teams that were ranked, that were played in and around the country, but having spring football now, Saturdays and Sundays, how do you think it was digested by the football community around the country?
Well, I think around here people were still getting unfrozen after the week we had. So maybe they didn't jump into it like maybe the rest of the United States did. But again, it's a specific time for this experiment that they're doing. And I think it's going to work because people miss football. People love football. And to have it in the spring now, when you have all these other choices, I mean, you sit down on a Saturday, you can basically not move.
Right.
You know, we used to call one of the guys who used to play pro baseball, Jay Johnstone, used to call it rotting. And he said if you could sit there from Friday to Sunday and not move, that was like an official weekend rot.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are going to do that coming up in the spring. You got baseball, you have hockey playoffs starting, you have the NBA playoffs starting, you have the NCAA tournament. Now you have football on top of it.
Yeah.
So
and
I think
it's football on a high level because the FCS level does have a lot of players, as you mentioned. Just about every roster in the NFL,
every single one,
has players from the FCS, and they make a lot of huge contributions. Jacksonville State will play this weekend at home. It's a top 25 matchup. They'll play against Tennessee Tech. Tennessee Tech is the number 23 team in the latest stats poll. Meanwhile, Jacksonville State ranks number 16. Of course, they didn't play their game last week at Tennessee State because of all the ice and snow and whatnot in northern Alabama and in the city of Nashville. What are some of the things you're looking forward to from Burgess Snow Field? With this group, it's a veteran group coming back. Obviously, their quarterback, Zaire Cooper, was injured, so he's out. And so the guy that took over in their last game when they got the big win at the end of the year against FIU, he's the guy coming in. His name's Zion Webb. A lot of people know of him because he's played a lot of football games. Now he'll be asked to start the game. coming up on Saturday. As far as technique, as far as the overall, what you would normally see in a football season, I would think that you would see some rust. It wouldn't be a shock to see some rust from JSU on Saturday.
Yeah, well, I think these guys, not only are they coming off of COVID, which there's not, we've talked to length about how it's not normal, but also it's been a long time since they've been on the field. I mean, it was 2019 the last time they played.
Well, they played 4 games in
okay.
That's right. They played 4 games, but it was one of those things where they had a long training camp and they played those 4 games in October. So it's been a long, kind of a weird off season here over the last 3 months.
And even that, knowing that you played, I forgot about that they played those 4 games in October and then coming back. I mean, it's really weird to do that for football. Maybe baseball, some teams are used to doing that when you would play 2 schedules that way. But, I mean, these guys have never had to do that before. So they're picking up on where they left off of, back in October and November. So I think there's going to be some rust, obviously. But the other thing is the type of weather you're going to play in. It's going to be a little bit hotter out there for some of these guys. Maybe fatigue's going to become a factor. I don't know. There's just a lot of different things for them to get used to. And I'm looking forward to it. I think that, the big-time athletes, they know that this is their time to shine because there's no other football that anybody else is watching.
Exactly. Head coach John Gross in his weekly press conference talked about the fact that they're playing an all OVC schedule, so they're not playing down any, and he likes the way the scheduling sets up for the Gamecocks this year.
The more quality opponents we can play, the better. And I'm not saying let's go out and pick up Alabama and Auburn, those 2 off spots or 2 SEC teams, but I don't really want to play a Division II or somebody else like that. I'd rather play a quality FCS team than I would, go and play down. I just don't. I've never been a proponent of those games do you a lot of good. I mean, I don't even really, like the games you've seen this past weekend where they played maybe an NAIA school or Division II school. When you go out there and beat somebody 60-0, I don't know how much your team gets better from that, other than just, your team's going to play about a half, and kind of getting in that. So I think we can do that ones-on-ones. So I would rather play a challenge in the FCS team than I would play down level. So I don't lobby hard for playing down level for sure.
And they won't do so. They'll have a very, very tough game coming up this week against Tennessee Tech, who already has a game in. I think that's really important to know. They have a game in, and everybody says you make your most improvement throughout the course of the year from week 1 to week 2. We'll see how JSU does. That game is Sunday, 3 o'clock, Burgess Snowfield on ESPN+. Our own Mickey Shaddricks will be on the call on that one. Meanwhile, let's go to the professional level. A guy that we've talked about at length, and then he ended up winning a Super Bowl earlier this month, Tom Brady. Some news out today with their general manager. Their general manager, Jason Rich, talked today and said that he and Bruce Arians, get this, they're talking about a 43-year-old, extending him even further. Do you like this move?
Well, he said he wants to play to 45.
That's right.
And you look at the way he's played. He's playing better than 20-year-olds, and he's won a Super Bowl. So I think he's in a pretty good negotiating, position here. And Brady continues to break just about every stereotype that ever existed known to man, whether it's age, whether it's arm strength, whether it's just the ability to get out there and play amongst guys that are 10, 15 years younger than you, to win with 2 totally different teams. Totally different receivers, totally different systems, everything you could possibly do, he's done. So I think he, this is something that if he wants to play till he's 50, you probably could.
Just let him.
I mean, look, if this guy told me you could walk on water, I would believe him. I would have to see him drown before I, thought he couldn't do it.
It's so funny because they were interviewing actually some of the players on the team. Shady McCoy actually said that if Brady said, "Hey, go walk on water," you won't drown. He said, "Yeah, I'd probably do it."
I probably would.
And that's the power that he had. And the 43-year-old officially signed through next year. They will try to see if they can get him further along. Meanwhile, another interesting topic that I found was from ESPN, the SEC's. Or the players, the newcomers, I should say, they did the top 25, the way early top 25, and one of the things they talked about was some of the people that were joining the league, whether it's incoming freshmen, transfers, new coaches, and number 2 on the list, as far as the number 2 most intriguing newcomer is Bill O'Brien, the new offensive coordinator at the University of Alabama. A lot of people aren't familiar with these names because they're new to the conference. But do you consider Bill O'Brien the most intriguing newbie, so to speak, in the SEC?
Well, one of them, because there has been rumors that he isn't the easiest guy to get along with. But then again, a lot of Belichick guys aren't easy to get along with. But they come here, they learn, and then all of a sudden they change working with Saban. A little bit different working with Saban. But I'm interested in Jason Marshall. If he doesn't throw a shoe, he's already ahead of the game, like kind of the anti-Marco Wilson. So we'll see.
You see all the other names on the list, including Chance Campbell and also Durante Jones, defensive coordinator at LSU. That was a odd search as Ed Orgeron tried to find a defensive coordinator. Finally landed on Durante Jones. So also see some of the other names on the list. And we'll see how Bill O'Brien does with head coach Nick Saban at Alabama. Well, meanwhile, coming up next year on Overtime, we will close up our program with some special final thoughts from Mark. Welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. Mark, you brought up to me a really good idea here. It's the final Wednesday show, the final show in Black History Month, in the month of February. And I know that you've been able to get your hands on a lot of research about how special this month is in the sports world and kind of what this means to people who kind of broke barriers, so to speak, and had lasting legacies. And I wanted to be able to give the floor to you and highlight some of the things that you've seen along your journeys.
Well, I've always appreciated the fact that, I've never seen color at all. I've never seen color. I've never seen status as anything. I've always stood against two things in life: bullies and elitists. People who look down on other people either because of their skin color or because of their social status. Those are two things that really irk me and get me mad. I mean, you can see in society now your ability to be smart, to think for yourself. That's what really matters, the type of person you are. And just even in all the different circumstances of my life, that's what I was always taught, is quality of character. Jackie Robinson was one of my heroes in life. So was Magic Johnson. There are a lot of guys that I've watched and really admired over the years. But what I wanted to do was come up with I started a website, and at the website I wanted to honor some of the guys who, like Jackie Robinson, but maybe were a little bit more unknown. Athletes that broke through in their sport, but weren't as famous as Jackie Robinson. You have a guy like Earl Lloyd, who was the first player to play in the NBA. Chuck Cooper, the first one to be drafted by the Boston Celtics in 1950. But a thing that really I found interesting is the Kentucky Derby. Yeah. The Kentucky Derby started in 1875, and 15 of the first 28 races were won by African Americans. In the very first race in 1875, 13 of the 15 entrants were black jockeys. Isaac Murphy is a guy who's won 44% of his races. First guy to win consecutive Kentucky Derbies in 1890 and 1891. Alonzo Clayton was the youngest to win in 1892. There's just so many different things. Oliver Lewis, he won. The horse he ran was Aristides, and winning the first ever Kentucky Derby. Right. So that's a lot about history that people don't know. I didn't know that. And I think educating people, to me, is what I love to do. I love to be educated. I have a thirst for knowledge. Another athlete that I really admire is Althea Gibson. She's a woman who broke through in two sports. She was the first female golfer, and she was the first female tennis player. Wow. African-American female golfer and tennis player. And she dominated in tennis. Wasn't as good in golf. Right. I don't get golf either. But Jack Johnson, a guy who came out and dominated in the early 1900s when, it was really not that popular to be black and to be a very good boxer. Right. He was a towering figure, by the way. Just folklore, from a folklore perspective. And he was not shy. He'd get right up in your face. So, stuff like that I think has really made an impression on me, and I wanted to be able to tell some of those stories on my website, and that's what I got the chance to do. And it's always meant something to me to give back like that and educate people on things that I think if they knew, it would really be something that they could advance for themselves, because a lot of these people don't really get recognized. Jackie Robinson does. A guy like Curt Flood, who there wouldn't be all these big contracts in major leagues if it wasn't for him. He completely changed the economics of baseball. Absolutely, and a sacrifice that he made. A guy called Kenny Washington, he was the first athlete to sign a contract with the NFL. He played with Jackie Robinson at UCLA. Wow. Fritz Pollard was one of the first coaches back in football back in 1920. So I think it's important that people educate themselves on that, just so they can become familiar about other avenues of sports that they didn't know. The other thing is March 17, 1946, it'll be 75 years since Jackie Robinson broke in and played in the minor leagues for Montreal. He wound up playing for that year. I wrote a 3-part series on what 1947 season was like, because if you remember, not only that, but the manager that he had, Leo DeRocha, who really would have been great for him, because DeRocha was a guy who hated umpires. He didn't care about color or anything. Was not. He probably would have been the best example for him. He got suspended before that season started, so he wasn't there for Robinson that first season. So Jackie had a lot of other things that he had to put up with. Where if DeRocha was there, he would have been able to take a lot of the heat for those umpires. And he dealt with a lot of racists on those Brooklyn Dodgers teams. You know, guys, Dixie Walker didn't want to play. Said, you know, went to Ruff, said, I don't want to play, trade me. And they didn't trade him, but a lot of other guys that got traded because, you know, they didn't understand what kind of person Jackie Robinson was and what he represented and what he eventually would change. Pee Wee Reese was one of those guys who did get it, and they became special friends. So a lot of special things concerning Jackie Robinson. I get very emotional when I think of him, because I can't even imagine what he must have faced.
And then he was obviously a great baseball player as well. I mean, he had to face all that stuff off the field, and then, you know, produced on the field and produced in a fantastic way. The movie The Soul of the Game is a really, really great one that documents a lot of that, what ended up happening as the Negro Leagues and players from the Negro Leagues ended up making it on the worldwide stage. You mentioned that you put it on your website, and give the people the website where they can find not only that story, but all your great work.
Yeah, ckmagicsports.com. It's African-American heroes I started, and it's a lot of different athletes that aren't as well known as Jackie Robinson, but that 3-part series on Jackie Robinson is in there too. Satchel Paige is another guy. Ted Williams said he was the toughest pitcher he ever faced. So, and also there's you know, cancer survivor. I have a blog on surviving cancer called Living as a Cancer Survivor. My book, I actually wrote a book on surviving cancer called My Scars Tell a Story. And I have about 400 or 500 articles on sports that I've written over the years on it. And, you know, everything from basketball to baseball, college sports, professional sports, everything you could think of. Because being a sports historian, you got to be good in all the different areas of sports. But yeah, it's a very special month, very special things that those guys represented to me.
No question at all. You're doing great work, and go over to the website and be able to read a lot of those going into this month. And as we move forward, Mark always brings great information as always, and did the same thing again tonight. Thank you for joining us on our program. Keep in mind, programming alert, that we will have all of the state championship high school basketball games from Birmingham right here, Class 1A to 7A, coming up next week. And so we will see you next time here on Overtime on WOTM. Have a great night.